Hello, we have been discussing about the concept of sustainability. We will be studying further today about the authors Hourdequin versus Milbrath's views on sustainability, which comes under the paper Environmental Ethics that is being taught in semester 7 for the GE students from the Department of Philosophy, University of Delhi. This is Dr. Ananya Barua, Associate Professor in the Department of Philosophy, Hindu College. Our first discussion today would be how did Hourdequin, the protagonist or the author on sustainability, locates sustainability in his or her book. Now, Marian Hourdequin's textbook is explicitly organized to move from values and theory to real-world practice. She examines classical ethical theorists and contemporary environmental approaches like anthropocentrism, its critiques, social roots of environmental problems, and then applies them to institutions, climate change, ecological restoration, and civic engagement. Sustainability appears throughout this theory to practice as an organizing, practical concern. It is the kind of normative aim that, number one, forces us to widen moral concern beyond narrow human self-interest. Number two, makes institutional design and justice central. And number three, requires humility about scientific uncertainty and historical justice. The key locations in the book where sustainability is discussed or implied are vis-a-vis the themes on anthropocentrism and its critiques, where debates about whether sustainability is simply prudent long-term self-interest, which is in a way a human-centered sustainability, or whether it must also protect non-human beings and ecosystems. Number two, social roots of environmental problems and ethics, institutions and the environment. Sustainability as a problem requiring institutional reform, policy, markets, civic, culture, not only private ethics. Number three, global climate change and ecological restoration, concrete arenas where sustainability's tension, which is justice, trade-offs, historical responsibility, restoration goals, become visible. We will now be checking the philosophical insights of Hourdequin, who brings to sustainability, and we see that for her, sustainability is a multi-criterion ethical problem, which basically is that it emphasizes the environmental ethics cannot be reduced to one moral theory. Sustainability requires balancing instrumental value, which is ecosystem services people rely on, intrinsic value, which is value in non-human life or ecosystems themselves, and relational or communal values, how people, identities, and practices depend on landscapes. This means sustainability is not merely an economic optimization problem, but a plural value ethical task. So we see the implication then policy choices, which is like what to restore, which species to prioritize, must be justified across different value frames, not only by cost-benefit calculations. Further, we see sustainability demands an expansion of moral concern, but with practical constraints. Hourdequin surveys anthropocentrism and its critiques. She shows how broadening moral concern, that is to animals, to species, to ecosystems, changes what sustainability looks like. Example, protecting ecosystem integrity rather than only human resource streams, but also notes conceptual and practical limits, how to weigh competing claims, how to act under uncertainty. Ethical theory informs what counts as sustainable, human-centered resilience versus ecological integrity. By translating that information into decisions that requires institutional mechanisms that can handle plural values. Further, institutions are the crucial mediators of sustainability. Now, one of Hourdequin's main moves is to shift attention from individual duty to institutions, laws, markets, bureaucracies, and civic practices shape large-scale outcomes. Sustainability is therefore often a problem of institutional design, governance, and civic virtue, which is to do with public institutional design, governance, and deliberation, trust, and so on. Her chapters on ethics and institutions and on engaging environmental concerns stresses this, which further again means that philosophical prescriptions for sustainability must include institutional ethics, fairness in policy design, democratic engagement in climate decisions, and mechanisms for intergenerational accountability. Number 4, justice, local and global, inter and intra-generational, is central to sustainability. In her treatment of climate change and social roots, Hourdequin foregrounds questions of responsibility, that is, who caused environmental harms, who bears the costs of, say, adaptations, mitigations, and what duties do affluent generations owe the less affluent and future persons. Sustainability is thereby inseparable from distributive and corrective justice. Sustainability policies that ignore justice, which example imposing costs on vulnerable communities, are ethically incomplete and politically unstable. Restoration and precaution. Humility about ends and means. Hourdequin's chapter on ecological restoration explores whether restoration aims at returning to historical baselines, creating functional ecosystems, or attending to human values bound up with places. That discussion highlights a philosophical humility. Sustainability is not simply returning to a pure past. It involves contested normative goals and scientific uncertainty. Restoration and sustainability strategies should acknowledge uncertainty, plural goals, and the value-laden nature of healthy ecosystems. Number 6, cross-cultural perspectives enrich sustainability. Reviewers and the publishers note Hourdequin's inclusion of Chinese philosophical ideas about self and relations, supporting a multi-criterial perspective. This pluralism helps avoid the traps of strictly Western individualist frames when thinking about sustainability as communal practice. Sustainability ethics benefits from comparative philosophy. Different cultures can offer alternative conceptions of human-nature relationships and collective responsibility. Now, if we talk about the strengths, we will see that about Hourdequin's theory on sustainability, the shift from theory to practice integration. By structuring the book to move from values to institutions and then to case studies, climate restorations, and so on, Hourdequin makes clear how abstract moral claims must be institutionalized to produce sustainable outcomes. This helps bridge the ought-can gap in environmental ethics. Pluralism and practical humility. She resists single theory answers and makes visible the trade-offs between competing values: justice versus efficiency, human needs versus non-human integrity. Her work's attention to restoration and climate brings out real-world complexity rather than idealized doctrines. The other strength is the attention to institutions and civic engagement. By emphasizing institutions and public engagement, Hourdequin supplies a roadmap for how sustainability might be pursued politically and socially, not only morally. Accessible and up-to-date. Reviews and the second edition signal that the book is both readable for students and updated to engage recent scholarships and empirical findings. However, there are also limitations or critiques. Let us see some of those. The scope versus the depth trade-off. As an accessible textbook, Hourdequin covers many approaches and issues. The breadth sometimes means less space for deep technical treatments of, say, feminist environmental theory, indigenous sovereignties, or the full complexity of economic modeling used in sustainability policy. Readers seeking specialist depth in any one subfield may need supplementary texts. The other one could be the non-Western traditions, could have been expanded a little bit more. While Hourdequin helpfully brings in the Chinese perspectives, one could argue for even broader engagement with indigenous epistemologies and post-colonial critiques, which have distinctive and highly relevant accounts of sustainability grounded in place-based obligations. This is a common scholarly critique of broadly framed environmental ethics texts. Further, from the moral insight to political feasibility, the work rightly emphasizes institutions, but there remains the hard problem of political mobilization in unequal societies. Translating ethical visions of sustainability into politically feasible reforms, especially across powerful national interests, requires additional socio-scientific and movement strategy material that her work, being philosophical and introductory, cannot exhaust. Further, we see that the relevance today, why Hourdequin's framing matters for sustainability practices, because number one, it connects values to policy choices. Sustainability debates too often get framed as a technical carbon budgets, carrying capacities. Hourdequin forces us to ask why certain ends matter. Example, why preserve wetlands and for whom? A crucial corrective when policies are framed purely in economic terms. Places justice at the center. Climate policy and sustainable development succeeds politically only if they fairly distribute burdens and benefits. Hourdequin's ethical lens clarifies obligations across generations and between rich and poor nations' communities. Number three, encourages plural, deliberative institutional design. Because sustainability requires negotiating among diverse values, Hourdequin's emphasis on civic engagement and institutional ethics points to democratic procedures, which is to do with participatory planning, deliberative fora as a necessary complement to techno-scientific solutions. Further, promote intellectual humility in restoration and adaptation. Real-world interventions, restoration projects, managed retreat, geoengineering debates are ethically fraught. Hourdequin's discussion of restoration shows why clear normative frameworks and careful stakeholder processes are necessary before large-scale action. Now, if we are to see the practical takeaways, we see those in when teaching or researching sustainability, we adopt Hourdequin's theory practice pattern, which is present in moral frameworks, analyze case studies, then examine institutional mechanisms. Further, designing sustainable policies to be multi-criteria, including ecological integrity, human well-being, and justice measures, and makes trade-offs explicit, using deliberative and inclusive institutional forms to resolve value conflicts and build legitimacy for sustainability measures. Further, to combine philosophical reflection with place-based knowledge, including indigenous perspectives, to avoiding one-size-fits-all prescriptions. So we see that in environmental ethics, from theory to practice, Hourdequin structures around how environmental values are translated into social practice. And basically in chapter 5, which is to do with ethics, institutions, and the environment, it explores the relationship between moral ideals and the social institutions, laws, markets, infrastructures that shape environmental outcomes. It then concludes with an extended discussion of sustainability as an organizing moral concept in environmental ethics. Now, our further discussion is sustainability then, as we understand, is an ethical ideal, not just an ecological goal. So Hourdequin emphasizes that sustainability is normative. It reflects what we ought to preserve and why. It is not merely about maintaining resources for human use, but about valuing ecological systems, intergenerational justice, and human flourishing over time. This shifts sustainability from technical management term into a broader ethical horizon. Philosophically, this means sustainability is grounded in a pluralistic value theory. It incorporates instrumental, intrinsic, and relational values, and not just economic efficiency. This is consistent with her broader text, which treats environmental values as multifaceted rather than reducible to one metric. Also, we see that sustainability integrates ethical concern with institutional reality. Hourdequin states sustainability within the institutional context, laws, markets, bureaucratic norms, because ecological resilience and long-term stewardship cannot be achieved by individual choices alone. Sustainability is, in her view, an institutionally mediated moral aspiration. We pursue it through political frameworks, public deliberation, policy instruments, and civic engagement. Here she highlights a philosophical point about social embeddedness. Morality is not only about individual duties. Sustainability requires collective responsibility and institutional accountability. Further, sustainability involves justice, especially the inter- and intra-generational. Building on her earlier discussions of environmental justice, this section frames sustainability as fundamentally connected with justice across time and space. Ethical commitments to those in the future and those in vulnerable communities now. Hourdequin treats intergenerational equity as a structural requirement of sustainability. We cannot talk about sustainable systems if we disregard fairness across generations. This resonates with broader environmental ethics debates that distinguish sustainability from simple resource conservation. True sustainability reconfigures priorities of justice and obligation. So, for her, in a nutshell, number one, sustainability is ethically pluralistic, which is it cannot be reduced to economic valuation alone. It involves moral breadth, including ecosystem justice, human needs, and future persons' interests. So sustainability is a normative project, not a neutral technical goal. Number two, sustainability is a bridge between theory and practice. It connects abstract ethical commitments, justice, value of life, duty to others, with public institutions and policies, showing that ethics has real political consequences, which basically means environmental ethics must speak to institutions, laws, markets, norms, not just individual morality. Number three, sustainability exposes tensions among values, which is the choices about what to sustain, which species, which community, which system, reveal deep value conflicts between human and non-human interests, short-term needs and long-term obligations, so on and so forth. Recognizing these tensions is not weakness, but honesty. Sustainability, properly understood, resists simplistic solutions. Sustainability presupposes interdependence and relationality. Human well-being and ecological health are bound together. Sustainability is not merely human-centered or purely ecological, but relational, intertwining human societies with ecosystem, which is that environmental ethics centers relational values, how beings and systems relate, not just isolated individuals or commodities. Also, why the specific section which matters philosophically and practically when we talk about sustainability is because, number one, it recasts sustainability as an ethical anchor. Many testaments of sustainability focuses primarily on technical aspects, metrics, thresholds, life cycle assessment. Hourdequin insists that sustainability is first a moral question about why we value and why. It is rooted in justice, community, and interdependence. It situates sustainability within social institutions. Rather than treating sustainability as a personal choice, she argues that it must be institutionalized through laws, democratic processes, and civic engagement. This makes her account more realistic and politically relevant. It avoids overtly idealized positions. Hourdequin is clear. She emphasizes that sustainability does not assume perfect knowledge or harmony. It acquires knowledge trade-offs and contested values, which reflects a mature philosophical engagement with complexity. So, if we are to summarize from the readings as has been prescribed in the syllabus, which is from pages 131 to 141 on Hourdequin, we see that number one, it is clearly a recap of institutional framing of ethics where morality shapes institutions and vice versa. Number two, introduction of sustainability as a concept in environmental ethics, distinguishing it from narrow self-interest or purely economic framing. Number three, analysis of sustainability's normative components, ecological integrity, justice, human aims, future. Further, discussions of challenges and trade-offs, value conflicts, uncertainty, institutional limits, and concluding with the need for ethical deliberation and institutional innovation. Democratic engagement, cross-sector cooperation. So we see that in Hourdequin's view, sustainability is not a mere label for long-lasting use of resource. It is a philosophical ideal that demands ethical clarity about what and whom we value. An institutional project requiring robust governance and civic engagement, a justice-dependent goal where the interests of the present, future humans and non-humans all weigh into moral deliberation. We shall be discussing more on this in our next class. Thank you so much.